Dolly Parton has spent her entire life being seen as America's sweetheart, the woman with the warm smile, the gentle humor, and a voice that never seemed to carry bitterness. For decades, she has been praised as the rare star who rose to the very top without leaving a trail of scandals behind her. But what if that image only tells half the story? What if behind that kindness lies a series of quiet fractures, moments of betrayal, and boundaries that were crossed one too many times? If Dolly Parton is truly the kindest soul in American music, then what could possibly make her walk away from someone for good? What really happened behind the smiles, the stage lights, and the carefully chosen public words that kept everything looking peaceful on the surface? The truth is, many of the people who once stood beside Dolly praised her in interviews and smiled next to her on camera. Yet, behind closed doors, there were slammed doors, hurt feelings, broken trust, and professional relationships that never recovered. One person tried to control her career and shape her future without her consent. Another openly questioned her commitment and reliability. One business deal nearly cost her the most valuable song she would ever write. And one moment of public humiliation was so severe that Dolly broke her silence in a way she almost never does. Dolly Parton did not build her legacy through public feuds, scandals, or explosive confrontations. She built it through restraint, dignity, and an almost stubborn refusal to fight back. She learned early on that silence could be a form of protection, a way to preserve her power without giving others the satisfaction of conflict. But even the most gracious people have limits, and even the most patient souls eventually reach a breaking point. To understand the 5 figures Dolly Parton could no longer work with, you first have to understand who she truly is beneath the image. She is a woman who grew up in deep poverty, in a household where music was not entertainment but survival. She is a songwriter who understood the value of her voice long before the world recognized it. And she is a star who chose silence not because she was weak, but because she was watching, remembering, and carefully protecting what mattered most to her. So the question remains, what happens when that silence finally begins to crack? Before Dolly Parton became a global icon, Porter Wagoner was already one of the most powerful figures in country music. He wasn't just a singer with a recognizable voice and flashy stage presence. He was a television force. By the mid-1960 seconds, The Porter Wagoner Show was one of the most influential syndicated country programs in America, reaching millions of households every week. Porter understood the business better than most. He knew what sold, what audiences wanted, and how to shape careers. When he noticed a young Dolly Parton, he saw something rare, not just talent, but star power waiting to be polished. In 1967, Porter brought Dolly onto his show, replacing the previous female singer, Norma Jean. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Fans who loved Norma Jean booed Dolly on stage, some even writing angry letters demanding she be removed. For a young woman just stepping into national television, it could have been devastating. But Porter stood his ground and kept her on. Dolly, for her part, stayed gracious, calm, and determined. She knew she had something to prove, and slowly, week by week, the audience began to accept her. Their harmonies were electric, their chemistry undeniable, and soon the boos faded into applause. On the surface, Porter and Dolly looked like the perfect team. Together, they scored more than a dozen top 10 hits, becoming one of the most successful duos in country music at the time. Millions watched them smile together on television every week, believing they were witnessing a partnership built on mutual respect and admiration. But behind the scenes, a very different dynamic was forming. Porter didn't just want to sing with Dolly, he wanted to control her career. He managed her appearances, decided what songs they recorded, and had the final say over many business decisions. At first, Dolly accepted it. She was grateful for the platform he gave her, and she understood the debt she owed him. But gratitude can quietly turn into confinement. As Dolly's songwriting matured and her ambition grew, she began to feel trapped. She wasn't just a pretty voice meant to support someone else's spotlight. She was a songwriter with her own vision. She wanted creative freedom, control over her music, and the chance to stand on her own. Porter, however, struggled to see her as an equal. What once felt like mentorship began to feel like a cage. Dolly later admitted that leaving wasn't easy. She had promised Porter she would stay 5 years. 5 years turned into 6, then 7, and still he wouldn't let go. So the question lingers, when does loyalty become obligation, and when does obligation turn into control? In 1974, Dolly finally left the Porter Wagoner show. To the public, the split appeared polite, even friendly. But behind closed doors, the damage had already been done. 5 years later, in 1979, Porter sued Dolly for $3 million, claiming she owed him management fees, show expenses, and a portion of her income after leaving the show. For Dolly, the lawsuit felt like a betrayal far deeper than money. This wasn't just a business dispute, it was personal. She quietly settled the case out of court, choosing freedom over a public fight. But the emotional toll was heavy. What hurts more, being attacked by a rival, or being dragged into court by the man who helped launch your dreams? Time, however, has a way of softening even the deepest wounds. By the late 1980 seconds, Porter and Dolly slowly began speaking again. In 2002, Dolly publicly honored Porter by inducting him into the Country Music Hall of Fame, openly acknowledging his importance in her life despite their painful history. When Porter was hospitalized with lung cancer in 2007, Dolly visited him. He passed away just weeks later. In a final act of quiet grace, Dolly held a private tribute concert at Dollywood, not for headlines, not for applause, but for the man who helped open the door to her dreams, even if he once tried to keep it closed. On paper, it looked like a dream collaboration. 3 of the most respected female voices in American music, Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt, and Emmylou Harris, coming together to create something timeless. Each woman was already a star in her own right, admired for talent, integrity, and influence. The idea of trio had been discussed for years, delayed again and again by schedules and record label politics, until it finally became reality in 1987. When the album was released, it was an immediate success, going platinum and winning a Grammy. To the public, it sounded like harmony in every possible sense. Behind the scenes, however, harmony was harder to maintain. While the 3 women respected one another deeply, their approaches to work could not have been more different. Dolly was fast, instinctive, and emotionally driven. She believed in capturing a song while the feeling was fresh, trusting her instincts and moving forward quickly. Linda Ronstadt, by contrast, was a perfectionist who treated the studio like sacred ground. She could spend hours refining a single vocal line, chasing technical precision and emotional nuance until everything felt exactly right. Emmylou Harris often found herself acting as the quiet mediator, smoothing tensions and keeping the project from drifting apart. So the question becomes unavoidable when creative visions collide: who gets to define what the right way really is? Despite the strain, the first trio album succeeded. But success did not erase the underlying friction. In 1994, the group reunited to record a second album, later titled Trio 2. What should have been a celebration of their bond instead reopened old frustrations. Conflicting schedules, ongoing label disputes, and unresolved differences slowed everything down. Years passed. By the time Trio 2 was finally released in 1999, the emotional connection that once fueled the collaboration had already weakened. The music still sounded beautiful, but the spirit behind it was no longer the same. Was it possible that waiting too long had quietly drained the joy out of what once felt magical? Linda Ronstadt eventually became vocal about her dissatisfaction. In interviews, she openly criticized Dolly's reliability during the project, describing her as frequently late, flaky, and difficult to pin down for recording sessions. To Linda, it felt as though Dolly's rapidly expanding solo career always took priority, leaving the group effort feeling secondary and uncertain. From her perspective, commitment to a project meant complete focus, discipline, and presence. Anything less felt like a lack of respect for the work itself. Dolly, however, never responded publicly with the same sharpness. She did not deny that their working styles were different, but she refused to frame the situation as a feud. True to her nature, she chose silence over confrontation. Still, the damage had been done. Linda made it clear that she had no intention of working with Dolly again. There were no screaming matches, no public insults exchanged, just distance, disappointment, and a collaboration that quietly came to an end. So, was this a clash of egos, or simply a clash of values? When two artists care deeply about their craft but measure commitment in different ways, does success bring them closer together, or does it slowly pull them apart? When people hear the names Dolly Parton and Elvis Presley in the same sentence, they often imagine admiration, mutual respect, and a collaboration that simply never happened. And in many ways, that's true. This was never a story of hatred or rivalry. In fact, Dolly has always been clear about one thing: none of what happened was Elvis's fault. But even without anger, a single decision would quietly create distance between two icons and change the course of Dolly's career forever. It began with "I Will Always Love You," a song Dolly wrote in 1973 during one of the most emotional periods of her life. The song was not a love ballad in the traditional sense, but a farewell written for Porter Wagoner as she prepared to leave his show and stand on her own. When Dolly released it, the song quickly became a hit, praised for its honesty and emotional restraint. What she didn't expect was that the most powerful man in music would soon want to claim it as his own. Elvis Presley loved the song. At the height of his fame in the mid-1970 seconds, he was known for transforming other artists' songs into cultural landmarks. When word reached Dolly that Elvis wanted to record "I Will Always Love You," she was deeply flattered. For a songwriter, there was no higher validation. But admiration quickly turned into anxiety when the business side of the deal emerged. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, demanded 50% of the publishing rights in exchange for allowing Elvis to record the song. For Dolly, this was not just a negotiation, it was a line she could not cross. She later explained that the song was the most important copyright in her entire publishing company. Giving away half of it would mean surrendering control over the very work that defined her independence as an artist. The decision broke her heart. She respected Elvis immensely and knew he truly loved the song. But agreeing to that demand would have set a precedent that could haunt her for the rest of her career, so she said no. The fallout was quiet but deeply personal. According to Dolly, Elvis was very sensitive, and while he never lashed out publicly, there was a noticeable shift between them after her refusal. The opportunity vanished. The collaboration never happened, and Dolly was left carrying the weight of knowing she had turned down the biggest star in the world to protect her creative ownership. Was it courage, or was it an unbearable risk to take so early in her career? Years later, that decision would prove to be one of the most important of her life. In 1992, Whitney Houston recorded "I Will Always Love You" for The Bodyguard, turning it into one of the best-selling singles of all time. The song reached a new generation and brought Dolly millions in royalties, not through luck, but through ownership. Still, the success never erased the emotional complexity of saying no to Elvis. Dolly has often admitted that she felt sad about how things ended, even as she stood by her choice. So, what does it mean to protect yourself in an industry built on power and pressure? When respect for a legend conflicts with respect for your own work, which one do you choose? Dolly Parton chose herself, and in doing so, quietly rewrote the rules. For someone as carefully composed and scandal-free as Dolly Parton, it takes a truly extreme moment to push her into public anger. In 2008, that moment arrived in a way no one expected through Howard Stern, one of the most provocative figures in American media. Stern built his career on shock, satire, and pushing boundaries, but what happened that year crossed a line Dolly had never imagined anyone would dare to cross. The incident centered around Dolly's audiobook, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. Stern's team edited real audio clips of Dolly's voice and stitched them together into a fake interview. The result made it sound as though Dolly was making vulgar, racist, and deeply offensive comments not only about herself, but about other artists, including longtime collaborators. The segment aired on The Howard Stern Show, framed as comedy. But to Dolly and her audience, it felt like something far darker: character assassination. This wasn't playful teasing or satire that could be brushed aside. It weaponized Dolly's own voice against her, twisting decades of carefully built trust with the public. For an artist whose reputation was rooted in dignity and kindness, the humiliation cut deep. And for once, Dolly did something almost unheard of. She spoke out. In a rare and emotional public statement, she said she had never been so shocked, hurt, and humiliated in her life, making it clear that the words aired on Stern's show were not hers and never would be. What made the situation even more painful was Stern's response, or lack of one. He refused to apologize. Instead, he laughed it off, insisting it was just a joke and accusing critics of being too sensitive. To him, it was shock radio as usual. To Dolly, it was a violation of her identity. She even hinted at legal action, something she almost never does. So when humor turns into humiliation, who gets to decide where the line is drawn? The backlash was immediate. Fans, country music stations, and fellow artists rallied behind Dolly. The outrage spread far beyond her usual audience, turning the incident into a broader conversation about consent, parity, and respect. Yet Dolly did not escalate the feud. She didn't attack Stern in interviews or drag the controversy out longer than necessary. Instead, she returned to the strategy that had defined her career: silence, restraint, and letting the public see the truth on its own. For years, the wound lingered. The incident became one of the rare moments where Dolly's grace had visibly cracked. And then, unexpectedly, something changed. In 2023, Dolly appeared on Stern's show for the first time. The context mattered. She was promoting her genre-defying rock album, Rockstar, and she was entering a space she had once avoided entirely. Stern, notably, was respectful. He praised her legacy, her voice, and her influence. The shock persona was dialed down, but the tension was unmistakable. This wasn't reconciliation in the traditional sense, it was control. Dolly wasn't there to relive the past or seek an apology. She was there on her own terms, rewriting the narrative rather than reacting to it. So, was this forgiveness? Or simply proof that time gives power to the one who waits? In the end, the Stern episode revealed something crucial about Dolly Parton. She doesn't fight loudly. She doesn't retaliate quickly. But she never forgets. And when she finally re-enters the room, it's because she chose to, not because she was forced to. Criticism is something every artist eventually encounters, but when it comes from another respected songwriter, it carries a different weight. That moment arrived for Dolly Parton through Jeff Tweedy, the lead singer and primary songwriter of Wilco. Tweedy is widely admired in alternative and indie circles for his introspective, often abstract lyricism, and his opinions on songwriting are taken seriously within that world. So when he spoke publicly about Dolly's work, the comments did not go unnoticed. In interviews, Tweedy made it clear that while he respected Dolly Parton's place in music history, he did not view her songwriting as particularly deep. He described her lyrics as simple and surface level, suggesting that her success relied more on accessibility than complexity. His most quoted remark came when he mentioned that Dolly had written Jolene and I Will Always Love You on the same day, then added that he thought she should have stopped after Jolene. Tweedy followed this by insisting that he loved Dolly Parton, framing his words as artistic critique rather than personal attack. But intention does not always soften impact. For many listeners, the implication was unmistakable. Tweedy appeared to reduce decades of Dolly's songwriting to a handful of catchy, emotionally direct songs, overlooking the lived experience behind them. Coming from a fellow songwriter, particularly one celebrated for depth and ambiguity, the dismissal felt sharp. Reports later suggested that Dolly was aware of Tweedy's remarks and that she did not appreciate them, even if she never addressed them publicly. And that silence, once again, became part of the story. So when does criticism cross the line from opinion into erasure? And who decides which form of songwriting deserves to be called serious? True to her long-established pattern, Dolly did not respond with anger or public rebuttal. She did not defend her work point by point, nor did she question Tweedy's credibility. She didn't need to. Throughout her career, Dolly has been open about how she writes, drawing directly from her own life, from poverty, heartbreak, faith, ambition, and loss. Her songs are intentionally clear, emotionally direct, and built to communicate rather than impress. For Dolly, simplicity was never a limitation. It was a deliberate artistic choice. That difference in philosophy is crucial. Tweedy's songwriting often invites listeners to interpret, decode, and sit with ambiguity. Dolly's songwriting invites listeners to feel understood. One approach prizes complexity, the other clarity. And while critics may debate which holds more artistic value, audiences have answered in their own way for decades. Dolly's songs have crossed genres, generations, and cultures, covered by artists far outside the country world, and embraced by people who see their own stories reflected in her words. Can something be called shallow if it continues to resonate so deeply with so many? In the end, Tweedy's comments did little to alter Dolly Parton's legacy. If anything, they highlighted the divide between critical validation and cultural impact. Dolly never needed approval from fellow songwriters to define her worth. Her influence was already written into the fabric of American music, not through obscurity or complexity, but through connection. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson in this final tension. Greatness is not always measured by how much a song asks of the listener, but by how much it gives back. So, whose definition of songwriting endures longer, the critics or the audience's? When you look back at these 5 moments, the control, the criticism, the humiliation, the disappointment, one thing becomes clear. Dolly Parton never built her legacy by winning arguments. She built it by choosing when to speak, when to walk away, and when to protect what was hers. None of these conflicts were loud. None ended in public meltdowns or dramatic revenge. Instead, they unfolded quietly, leaving scars that only time and perspective could fully reveal. With Wagoner, it was about control disguised as mentorship. With Ronstadt, it was the collision of different creative values. With Elvis Presley, it was a painful choice between respect for a legend and respect for her own work. With Stern, it was public humiliation that crossed a line she rarely allowed anyone to cross. And with Tweedy, it was the quiet sting of artistic dismissal. What connects all of these moments is not bitterness, it's restraint. Dolly never needed to expose anyone to make her point. She let time do the talking. She let her work outlive the criticism. And she understood something many artists never learn. Silence, when chosen freely, can be power. So perhaps the real question isn't who Dolly Parton clashed with, but why her response to conflict looks so different from everyone else's. Is it strength? Is it strategy? Or is it the wisdom of someone who knows that legacy is built not by reacting, but by enduring? Now we want to hear from you. Which of these moments do you think had the greatest impact on Dolly's life and career? Was it the battle over control, the sting of public ridicule, or the decision that changed her financial future forever? Do you see Dolly's silence as grace, or as something much more calculated? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. And if you appreciate deep dives into the stories behind music's biggest legends, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next chapter.